Good morning, everybody. I hope you are surviving hot summer weather in Korea. I coming from Seattle, where the temperature only hovering around 17 to 20 centigrade. Now I am almost dying, actually. But having read all these good papers, I am now surviving at the same time. Indeed, today's discussion to me is a very, very important one. And I really appreciate the four presenters' presentations. If the title of the conference says anything, indeed, so much change has occurred to Korean society. We used to talk about one of the four dragons. Now the title says Symptom. Although my English is quite limited, normally the connotations of symptom are negative. So although I see in one of the four papers, actually I noticed that there could be some positive symptoms, but throughout the papers we'll see what are the symptoms these four presentations authors actually provide us with. Okay, so my name is Yong-Chul Ha, as you see in the program. I used to be teaching at Seoul University, and all of a sudden this morning, I found myself the oldest person in the entire conference. With the limitations of privilege of being old, I would like to moderate this session as interestingly as possible. The way I would like to moderate this first session is, at least I would like to give, given this 2-hour session time limit, I would like to give each presenter 15 minutes presentation, and then 10-minute discussions, and then I'll open up the floor so that the audience could participate. But in passing, I would like to mention the following. When I was teaching at Seoul University, Korean academic community was run in such a way that if you reach beyond the 50 years old, actually you are supposed to start moderating the session. But defying the tradition, I would like to express my own thoughts on the four papers somewhere at the right moment. So having said that, I would like to invite Professor Park Myung-jun. Let me see. His topic is a very important and interesting one. Once again, tripartism and the politics of social pacts in South Korea. It's a very comprehensive review and then conceptual analysis of the labor, business, and state relationship for the last about 30 years. So please go ahead. You also have 15 minutes. And then don't continue like a labor disputes more than 15 minutes. Okay, all right.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Har, and thank you for the audience. Yeah, the topic of my presentation is, so to speak, tripartism, social pacts, or the corporatism in South Korea. I just deal with institutional evolution and its strategic dilemmas. This is a very major topic in the field of industrial relations, and then since about 30 years or so, I am dealing with this topic. Yeah, I prepared lots of letters, but I have to present in 15 minutes, so I'd like to practically go to the conclusion first. So this is what I would like to say. It was institutional drift. It was a tentative concept, but it's not my concept. It's usually in the political economy literature, there was a theory of institutional evolution, and one pattern is institutional drift. But I'm not very satisfied with this concept. I would like to rather more theorize from based on the Korean experiences, but I'm not so able now. Therefore, I tentatively accept this kind of institutional drift first. But it can give nuance how it just worked and so on. And then I will present as much as possible within this short time what went on. So, and then perhaps you can just guess why I just conclude institutional drift. Okay, I will come back to the front first. If you trace the trajectory of a social dialogue in South Korea, social dialogue in Korea usually means the formalized tripartite council interaction of the three partite actors directly interacting for policy making, usually in labor policies, social policies, and those areas. It has about 30 years, about 35 years history. And the turning point was 1996 or 1998, we can say. At the time, Korea was, it's a kind of heyday of democratization, and on the other hand, the neoliberalization. So this democratization link and global context were all mixed here, and then it just shifted in political actors and power opportunities, and then with these streams, labor unions and business groups took strategic choices, and also state as well. So we can say it's kind of a dual transition. And then, so the social dialogue was a product of democratization on the one hand, because of the rise of the labor movement and then their voices for freedom of association and freedom of democratic industrial relations. What it was reflected on the one hand, that this arrangement. And one interesting point is, unlike the Western European sequential route, democratization, welfare state, and neoliberalization, Korean experience was quite more compressed. Democratization and neoliberalization simultaneously. So therefore it was very burdensome for the government to deal with this topic. And there were always pro-labor items and anti-labor items, we can see. So, yeah. And it was also, I would like to say, the pro-labor items in Korea, which were dealt with in the tripartite interaction, was mainly in European context. About there were the topics in the early 20th century. Yeah, and neoliberal things were late 20th century. But in Korea, these two sets were dealt with simultaneously. And so it was, I would like to say, it was the exchange of non-synchronous agendas. So from the labor views, economic liberalization is a kind of erosion of labor rights, social safety nets. From the capital's view, economic democratization and the labor rights are tighter regulation and obstacle to competitiveness. So those were always conflicting, even now in Korea as well. In this context, so states pursued mediating the conflicts and tried to build up some institutional arrangement for class compromise and so on. So with this purpose, social dialogue was emerged. Social dialogue emerged as an auxiliary governance tool. And the double transition itself, with the change of political power characteristics, it was a kind of zigzag path. So pro-labor forces were oriented to more democratization and welfare state expansion, and the capital and pro-capital forces were oriented to liberalization and deregulation. So when the Conservative Party gained party, then they were just more enthusiastic in the latter. And the Minjudang, the Democratic Party, gained then the more oriented to former. So with this trend, the tripartite arrangement was strongly influenced by this political change. And with this change, therefore, the fate of social dialogue was also shaped a kind of a zigzag fashion. Korea's social life institutions had about, I just mentioned 30 years, and from early phase to modern time, there were very dynamic trends. And then especially I would like to say there were two broad phases. For pre-institutional phase, about very early time, mid-1990. And after that, it was institutionalized phase. And the institutionalized phase has also two stages. One is a pre-legal foundation, and then the next one is a legal foundation. And relatively, the institution itself was consolidated because it has its own legal basis. And after that, Tripartite Commission, and with the name of Economic and Social Development Commission, and currently Economic, Social, and Labor Council, it just changed its name. Its governance structure also changes somehow. And there were always political purposes why they try to change this. So in sum, so there are, I would like to say, the 5 stages of these dynamics. And also, in parallel to the institutionalized interactions, there were also non-institutional direct interactions as well. And somehow those two interactions were also they just comprise of the whole system. I just prepared lots of stories on this story, each stage, but I think I don't have enough time. So if you are interested, I can send you my PPT later. Okay. But anyhow, I'll just go on. I cannot read the whole, only some conclusion in each stage. So in the first stage, there was no stable platform, and it was very experimental. And especially the democratic unions, the labor movement, independent labor movements were excluded. And but with this exclusion, they just felt its limits, and so there were kind of social learning. And then after that, they just invited the KCTU, the Democratic Union, even though they were illegal at the time. And the second phase, second stage was the heyday of this social dialogue arrangement. As KCTU joined, and in this time, the democratizing reforms and land level deregulation advanced simultaneously, very vehemently, and also at that time there was a urgent political needs for tackling economic crisis. And after that, in the early Tripartite Commission era, we can say, and then it was a formal consolidation, but substantive stagnation, I would like to say. And it just moved to another institutional phase. And then it was the late Tripartite Commission era, mainly conservative time, and also very beginning stage of a Moon Jae-in government. So it was in this time the agenda was expected, but its vitality was limited under conservative ruling, and social pacts attempted but undermined by unilateralism and also trust deficits. So reform efforts culminated in institutional transformation later. And the current ESLC, Economic, Social, and Labor Council, it was it just drifted into also symbolic existence dominated by FKTU, so because KCTU did not join. And so here also they just argued for incorporating weak social groups, but it was not very organically designed, and there was also the clash inside. And with the time, the ESLC weakened, but rather the Presidential Jobs Committee just played a role rather more vividly as a platform for social dialogue. So here you can see I just mentioned the two unions, and then the attitudes of the union matters very much, especially the KCTU, the Democratic Union, is a very important factor. And only in the stage 2, KCTU joined. So in most of the time, only the moderate FKTU. So it is divided the unionism and their choice very critical in understanding the dynamics of social dialogues in Korea. Here, always what matters was whether KTC would join or not. Actually, even this Lee Jae-myung government, I think this must be also the important factor. Yeah, but I don't know how they cope with it. But perhaps KTCU will not join in the Economic and Social and Labor Council because they stigmatize it. It's a kind of a neoliberal instrument and so on. So, yeah. Okay, I will go on. Yeah. Why KCTU did not join? There are many reasons. There were insider fighting or a clash. But usually KCTU has its members in the large corporations, and then they have their own enterprise bargaining mechanism. They could gain their gains. Actually, they do not urgently need for their members' practical purposes. They do not need to join in this. But the FKTU did not have this kind of power. So rather, they just choice to join in this policy bargaining and then gain the more broader political gains, benefits. And also, there were problems inside of the government because it was the legacy of the developmental state. The economic bureaucrats, they were very reluctant to social dialogue mechanism. In the conservative government, the strong specifically, they just almost ignore it. In the Democrats Party government, relatively, they just try to behave harmoniously with the social dialogue. But in the very critical point, we can see they do not accept it. Yeah. So with this situation, with this trend, I just say so. In overall, the South Korean tripartism and social dialogue just show the institutional drift, and yeah, that's my final conclusion. So thank you very much for listening. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Park. Actually, as we all know, this is a very complicated subject, but then he provided us with a very succinct stage-by-stage sort of a characterization of the tripartism in South Korea. I'm sure based upon his presentation, we may generate a lot of questions and comments based upon that. Let me go on to the third presenter from India, Professor Jitendra Uttam. I have to dwell about 30 seconds on him. Actually, it's so nice to see you, Uttam, here in about 3 decades after you graduate from Seoul National Department of International Relations. And he has been very active in developing leading Korean studies in India at the Jawaharlal Nehru University in India. He has been, from the beginning, he has been working on political economy issues about South Korea, and he took with him to India and developing further and further. I remember reading some of his works in professional journals. So it's so nice to see you in such a long while. And particularly, I'm sure the audience should enjoy his presentation about comparing India to Korea today. Okay, please go ahead. However, we have only 15 minutes. Okay, all right.
It's my honor and my pleasure to be here where I studied for a long time. I did my PhD from the Department of International Relations. And I went back and teaching at Jawaharlal Nehru University. There is a program, Center for East Asian Studies, and we have 3 countries uh, Korea, China, and Japan. In 1976, this program was initiated, Korean Studies program, with one professor. Now we have 4 faculty members doing research on Korea. So it's my honor to speak in front of Professor Ha. He was in my PhD defense committee. So, sir, thank you very much. I have written a book with one of my colleagues from Australia, David Hunt, who also did masters from SNU, and we compared 9 countries of Asia and their varieties in capitalism. And I wrote a chapter on comparing Korea and Taiwan, but today I'm trying to see how capitalism evolved in 2 of Asia's economies, India and Korea. So this is going to be my index, the structural variation of capitalism in Korea and India. There are very distinct structural variations between the 2 countries. So the macro level distinctions and the micro level variations. This is the book that we wrote, and this one is the added India-Korea capitalism is not there in this form. So today's paper I wrote specifically for this conference. Actually, macro level variations. India, Korea, they have many similarities. Both countries, they were roughly same time, became independent and had a similar kind of pattern. However, one very important distinction between the 2 countries, that the socio-economic polarization that Korea had and how Korea confronted with that, and how the socio-economic polarization that India had and how India confronted with that. So in Korean case, in the 1950s, land reform and the education reform, Korea was able to demolish one of the hallmark of Korean socio-economic polarization, the Yangban system, as I understand. However, in India, the socio-economic polarization continued after the independence. And it's a massive socio-economic polarization in India, and it is presided by the caste system, the continuation of the caste system. So in Indian case, if somebody is rich, so he will be upper caste, and so economic richness and the social richness, both they meet. And this meeting has been very, it has a legacy. The Mughal times, the British time, this continued. And this continuation made Indian state to be irrelevant. Actually, the Indian state basically was captured by this nexus. The first Prime Minister of India, Jawaharlal Nehru, he was representing the upper layer of the caste. And thus, the capitalism that evolved in India has the shadow of the socio-economic polarization. Currently, India is the most unequal societies among the world. So, however, when I am saying that Korea confronted well and was able to demolish the inequality, it was not it will not go well to many Korean people who can see that again, these inequalities they have propped up in a different form. The chaebol system also concentrated wealth in the unprecedented level. In both countries, the capitalism organized from the top. India and Korea both, because the historical context was that the absence of the capitalist class. So, but the way the state, society, and the market, they interacted, they created, in Korean case, private enterprise, family-owned enterprises, and in India, because India's upper caste had no experience of doing business. So the private business in India was not able to sustain, and government controlled through the public enterprises. So what Korean case has been termed by Chalmers Johnson, that planned rational capitalist developmental state, and India planned rational socialist developmental state. So statist entrepreneurial capitalism. But in Korea, because the ownership was under the private hand, so there was much more space for the entrepreneurs to operate. But in India, the state capitalism, in the absence of local capitalist class, state as an owner, manager, and financer. It was all. So this is the macro level variation. Now we move to the micro level variation, and I have divided the state capacities because in India the state was captured by one social class. It was not easy for the state to entangle the state and the market and the society. Economy and society, these two pillars, they were merged, and the state was not able to confront this. So restructuring of the state-society relations by the independent Indian state was not easy. It tried, but it was already, the state was already captured. But in Korean case, the state, because after the colonialism ended, the most powerful interest groups in Korea, they disappeared because they were controlled by Japan. So the state, independent state in Korea was able to reset state-society relations, as in case of India, it was not. Then varied structures of corporate ownership, as I explained before. Variation in the industrial policy orientation. Actually, Korea moved with the labor-intensive mass manufacturing. And I think the labor intensity, or what I say, it can be controversial that Korea was able to introduce pro-poor, means involving the labor. But in India, India has much more labor, cheap labor, but Indian government moved with capital and technology intensive industrialization under the influence of the Soviet Union. So this was the difference between how the industrial policy orientation, and because of the labor intensive mass manufacturing, Korea designed export orientation, and in India, import substitution. Also variation in the focus of bureaucracy. Korea focused on economic bureaucracy under EPW, the Economic Planning Board. In India, because of the legacy, the British legacy, the bureaucracy has been focusing on only how to maintain law and order. Economic development, economic growth, they are not worried about. Of course, we have economic bureaucracy, but mostly the domination of the law and order situation and the prevention of the fragmentation of India. The international context. As we all know that during the Cold War time, India sided with the NAM, non-alignments, and close with the Soviet Union, and Korea was close to the capitalist bloc. So this also made these variations. So these micro and macro level distinctions, they led to the two varieties of capitalism: socially embedded form of capitalism and socially disembedded form of capitalism in India. Wider social base of capitalism led to systemic dynamism, sustainability, efficiency, and thus optimal performance in Korean case. Narrow social base of capitalism led to systems fragility and underperformance in India. So Korea's labor-intensive mass manufacturing produced mass employment and the mass consumption through the export orientation and eventually mass prosperity. It can be contested, but compared to India, we see this. And in India, resulted in the limited production, limited employment, and limited consumption and mass poverty. So, capitalist systems of India and Korea in the scale of efficiency, stability, and dynamism. So in the book, we have talked about the scale and measuring against that scale the efficiency, stability, and the dynamism. So in the efficiency gains demonstrated by high economic growth, decades of double-digit growth. So Korea performed, in compared to India, much better in the efficiency scale. Stability compromised, but in Korean case, the stability was compromised during the 1997 financial crisis that shows when the highly leveraged firms became insolvent. In India, stability gains remained unaffected during the 1997 and 2007-8 financial turbulence. But an overall dynamism of the Korean capitalism has been much more distinct. It has made Korea to move up in the industrial ladder, but in case of India, it failed. So policy lessons, what we can learn from this, that comparative analysis of Korean and Indian capitalist systems confirms that stability, sustainability, and efficiency of capitalism depends on its embeddedness in the society. If the capitalism is not linked with the society, it has a problem. To ensure wider social participation, the scale must work on policies aimed at creating a level playing field by promoting equity in all means, encouraging social and economic justice so that the wider society can take part in the process of capitalist economic development. Mass participation is the key to the improved health of the capitalist economy. Number two, policies aimed at promoting entrepreneurial spirit are essential to the efficiency, flexibility, and dynamism of the capitalist system. So the entrepreneurial means the state should be able to move with the changing economic needs. Third, market-conforming political economy, which experimented with Korea, is crucial for the functioning of the successful capitalist economy. Capitalism's success in countries like Korea is not exclusively based on unhindered capital accumulation drive, as the pre-1997 crisis phase suggests, but efficient distribution of accumulated capital is equally essential, which is the post-1997 crisis phase. Concluding remark. One, the Korean case confirms that egalitarian socio-economic foundations are the prerequisite of the efficient functioning of the capitalist system. Number two, on the other hand, the Indian case demonstrates that grossly polarized socio-economics hinders mass participation in the economy, thus leading to the malfunctioning of the capitalist system. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Symptom, for very enlightening comparison between India and Korea. I think what caught my attention is the social conditions for economic development, which has not been the main focus of the political economy literature in the past. And also, he referred to the international environments of the political, economic development, which also has not gotten enough attention, to my understanding, in the previous literature. So I thank you for your presentation. Finally, last but not the least, I would like to introduce Professor Kim Kyung-mi from Sapienza University of Rome. She'll be talking about comparison of digitalization of Japan and Korea. So I read the paper with so much interest, but I think her presentation will be more interesting than the actual paper. So, however, you have only 15 minutes. Okay, all right. So.
Thank you. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present in the political economy session of the this SNU International Conference. What I'm going to talk about today is digitalization in Japan and Korea. Okay. Since the 1990s, digital technology has dramatically reshaped our world. It has changed how products and services are designed, produced, and delivered, and even how people interact in everyday life. The digital revolution also dismantled the traditional value chains. This shift enabled horizontal specialization, allowing firms to choose and focus on their core strengths. Then, why does this change matter for nations? Because the future economy depends on mastering digital transformation. Digitalization is not only essential for business competitiveness, but also for solving societal challenges such as aging populations and climate change. However, digitalization creates new challenges because it blurs the boundaries between culture, technology, and industry. In many cases, this has led to inter-ministerial conflicts, policy duplication, and reduced effectiveness. In this context, the interest of this study is on how the process of adapting to digitalization has differed across countries. Particularly, this study focuses on the fact that although Japan and Korea, representative cases of the East Asian model, both pursued proactive digitalization policies, their outcomes have diverged. Japan, despite its high level of IT capability, has shown a very slow adaptation to digitalization. Whereas Korea has demonstrated a relatively successful digitalization process. Why then has Japan been slow to adapt to rapid technological changes such as the digital revolution, while South Korea has proven far more agile? These divergent trajectories of South Korea and Japan, particularly in their respective adaptations to digitalization since the 2000s, pose a significant challenge to the explanatory power of existing theories. Despite the persistence of statist coordination models and distinctive varieties of capitalism in East Asia, the institutional perspective failed to explain the contrasting developmental outcomes since the 1990s. They cannot account for Japan's transformation from a globally admired model in the 1990s to prolonged economic stagnation, nor do they adequately capture the fundamentally different results produced by similar digitalization policies in the region. On the other hand, cultural approaches highlight the differences in national character, arguing that Japan tends to be culturally conservative toward change, while South Korea exhibits a more adaptive and proactive disposition. However, cultural studies fall short in explaining Japan's earlier rapid growth and global economic leadership, or why reforms continue to stall despite the presence of pro-change political actors. Culture may influence institutional and policy outcomes, but it is not static. It evolves through discourse and is reshaped by the experience and implementation of institutions and policies. Actually, states coordination remains essential in both Japan and Korea. However, their adaptation to digitalization diverged. So the key puzzle of this study is why did Korea successfully adapt while Japan struggled in digitalization? Why has reform stalled despite pro-change actors in Japan, while it has succeeded despite resistance and conflicts in Korea? As an alternative to understand the different paths of the two countries, we focus on policy regimes. In this perspective, the main interests are the main actors and their discourses in policy regimes. First, let's say the impressive divergence in digital competitiveness of the two countries. Various international comparative indices, including WDC, NRI, and EGDI, clearly illustrated this divergence. For example, the IMD's World Digital Competitiveness Ranking reveals that Japan dropped from 23rd place in 2019 to 32nd in 2023, while South Korea improved from 10th to 6th during the same period. For the UN's E-Government Development Index, EGDI, when the first introduced in 2003, Japan and South Korea recorded similar ranks, 14th and 13th respectively. However, while South Korea is ranked 4th in 2024, Japan has remained largely stagnant, ranking 13th in 2024. However, as institutionalists emphasize, Japan and Korea still share similar institutional arrangements. Most of all, their government intervention in the economy and industrial policy is a characteristic distinguished with Anglo-Saxon free market and European social coordination. They have traditionally pursued policies for state-selected strategic industries, and their state interventions have depended on the merit-based bureaucracy. Actually, both Japan and South Korea have been adopting and promoting digitalization policies since the 1990s. Especially in 2001, the E-Japan strategy was launched with the goal of making Japan a leading IT state. And by 2016, the Society 5.0 initiative introduced in Japan. South Korea has also formulated and implemented digitalization policies since the 1990s. Especially 2004, the government introduced the IT 839 strategy, which aimed to stimulate new services, build digital infrastructure, and create future growth engines. During the 2010s, the iKorea 4.0 initiative was launched to respond to the challenges of the fourth industrial revolution. However, Despite these similar institutional characteristics and policies, the outcomes of digitalization diverged. Why did such differences emerge? This study focuses on the different policy regimes to explain these divergence paths. In Japan, policymaking is highly decentralized and consensus-based. Authority is fragmented within the ruling LDP factions, and prime ministers are weak. Bureaucrats play the leading role in setting the policy agenda before it even reaches the cabinet. However, since the 1970s, there has been a gradual shift. Economic downturns reduced bureaucratic discretion over public resources, and LDP lawmakers gained more influence through the policy affairs research committees. Instead, policy tribes was developed. They built alliances with bureaucrats and business associations. The impact of this system has been significant. Entrenched vested interest formed through the iron triangle. Politicians, bureaucrats, and business groups have consistently blocked reforms. Moreover, this vested interest reinforced what is often called the Galapagos syndrome, meaning Japan's tendency to cling to unique but isolated paths that hinder adaptation. Unlike Japan's decentralized consensus model, Korea follows a more hierarchical and centralized system. The president dominates policy formation with limited role for parliament and political parties. These president-led policy nexuses, main actors are president, bureaucrats, and civil society. So, unlike Japan, political clientelism is centered around the president. New presidents dismantle existing clientelistic networks and form new ones. Economic policy coordination is mainly led by presidential secretariat advisors, not parliament or prime minister. These differences in policy regimes have led diverging paths between Japan and Korea in industries related to digitalization. But I think maybe I don't have enough time, so I'll skip this part. So why did Korea adapt faster than Japan in globalization? This study focused on the policy regimes. In Japan's consensus-based model, policymaking has been led by the Liberal Democratic Party in close alignment with bureaucratic and business interests. However, this system has often resulted in delayed reforms due to resistance from entrenched vested interests, especially since the 1990s. In contrast, South Korea operates under a more hierarchical model characterized by strong presidential leadership, which enables more decisive reform implementation and flexible adaptation to global challenges, despite its potential of political polarization and governance stalemates in divided governments. And this study emphasizes that discursive politics in policy regime shaped reform priorities. Japan clung to narratives such as Galapagos syndrome, hindering reform. Korea embraced reform discourse, centering on who should lead a change, not whether to reform. Okay. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Professor Kim, for very interesting and stimulating presentation. Now, I think we are on right track in terms of time management. So next, I would like to invite two discussants four papers. And but first, I would like to introduce the Professor Shin Kwang-young, a very distinguished sociologist in Korea and beyond. Of course, I have read his previous works. I noticed he has such a critical mind in approaching different issues. Particularly, his main focus has been sort of social structure, class formation, and the manifestation of social conflicts, including sometimes labor issues, globalization, etc. So his interest have run the whole gamuts of every part of the sociology and beyond. So I am very glad and pleased to introduce Professor Shin Kwang-young today. And the second, the Professor Park Hyun-suk from Future Institute of Korean National Assembly. So he is such a young rising scholar that I don't know much of him in personal level, but I'm sure he'll provide us with a very different perspectives on various presentations. So please, Professor Shin, please go ahead.
Thank you very much for a nice introduction. And we have 4 presentations, but we don't have only 10 minutes. So I'd like to focus on 1 or 2 issues for each presentations. First presentation by Professor Suyeon Christine Lee is a hot issue right now in South Korea. How can we explain there are some kind of a conservative tone of young Koreans? So there are many discussions. And today we heard a very concrete statistical analysis, and we see the vivid transition of young Koreans, some attitude towards many issues. I would like to emphasize the new term to explain, to understand that kind of change. It is a quiet revolution. I used to use it to explain how a gender issue became a hot issue in South Korea. Why young Koreans are worrying about their status at the level of society and at the same time at the level of individuals' career. So my understanding of the changing attitude towards each gender issue among young Koreans is a result of quiet revolution, in which female students, young students, began to get upper hand over young Korean males. So it is it's an unseen trend, but it's a very important, I think, a trend, new trend in Korean society.
Could you be more specific about
The university entrance rate for women began to exceed that of men in 2009. It's the first. Today, the proportion of female students in medical school has risen from about 10% in the 70s to 56% in 2023. So many key opportunities, key jobs that has been dominated by Korean young men began to diminish. It means that Korean young men began to lose something they enjoyed for the last 5 or 6 decades. Furthermore, they have to spend almost 1.5 years in the military service. At least they spend 2 years before and after the military service to get back to university. So it means that during the whole life, for young Koreans, from elementary school to university, they began to much behind the female students in terms of GPA, in terms of many opportunities for good jobs. So I think it is a unnoticed change, but very important for understanding of young students' understanding of social system and gender issue. So they think that themselves as a victim of social system in terms of education, in terms of military service, and in terms of the labor market system. So that's the important part of the story to understand what's going on in contemporary gender relations among young Koreans. The feminists criticize Korean society as a patriarchal society, strong patriarchal society. That's right. In terms of many indicators, international organizations provide many indicators. Korean society is a very hierarchical and patriarchal society. But young students think that they didn't create that kind of system. They are victim of the system. So that's a very big gap in understanding of gender issue across age cohort and between men and women. So that's the point I think you should consider in interpreting the modern sexism in Korea. That is a little bit different from a European case. That's my point for the first presentation. And the second presentation is a tripartite and the politics of social dialogue in South Korea. I fully agree with Professor Young-Jun Park's presentation. And I would like to emphasize two things. One is the role of company unionism in shaping a contemporary Korean industrial relation system, including tripartite system. So it is an important factor in shaping contemporary labor politics, industrial relation system, and labor market segmentation. So I think it should be considered as one of key factors in shaping in the failure of the formation of social dialogue in South Korea. And the role of political instability. We observed frequent change of ruling parties. 5 years or 3 years, continuous change. So it means that KCTU, the Progressive Labor Union Confederation, didn't trust any political parties because it's very unstable. Sooner or later, we will see different political parties with very different political policy orientation toward labor issues. So KCTU didn't recognize the whole political system and independence of those political system too. So then we can raise some questions. Given the frequent changes in the ruling parties and the predominance of conservative governance, what institutional or political strategy could encourage sustained union's participation in national level tripartite dialogue? And how can tripartite institution be restructured to address the needs of precarious workers while still engaging unions whose members are primarily regular employees in large firms? What factors could motivate the shift within enterprise-based unions toward greater involvement in broader social and economic issues beyond their own companies? So those are the three questions to Professor Myung-Jun Park. And so the presentation is a comparative analysis of capitalism in Korea and India. Now we observed the post-globalization process initiated by Donald Trump. It displays that we should look at the global context when we discuss national political economy in East Asia as well. So Donald Trump emphasized the tax, level of tax, tariff policy. It itself is a trade policy. And also it is a part of industrial policy, labor policy. So to explain cross-national differences in economic growth and industrial development, I think scholars have frequently relied on macro-level national variables as explanatory factors. Among the most prominent factors were industrial policy and welfare policy. The emphasis on state-led industrial and trade policies emerged as a key framework for understanding East Asian economic growth. This perspective ultimately tends to highlight the role of the state power and policy choice of dominant political actors or elite. However, such an approach overlooks a critical reality. While state formulate policies, production and sales are carried out by private firms, private business. In the case of East Asia, it also neglects the fact that the linkage between consuming goods market and production using borrowed technology and low-wage, low-skill labor, that was not established by East Asian countries. It was established by the United States, mostly under the Cold War system. The Cold War made it possible for East Asian countries to successfully pursue export-led industrialization targeting the American market rather than domestic market. For geopolitical reasons, the US permit integration of East Asian production with American consumption. It's a key global shift. Industrial production and American consumption has been linked under the Cold War system. So we have to look at changing global capitalist dynamics to fully understand the rise of East Asian economic system. Finally, Professor Kyung-Mi Kim's presentation, Politics of Digitalization in Japan and Korea, is a very interesting comparative study. In Korea, failure to success in digitalization is a key point, according to her presentation. In contrast, in Japan, success led to failure in digitalization. Japan was appraised as Japan as #1 in the 70s by American scholars. But it experienced a continuous stagnation of its economy, sometimes called the lost 30 years after that. So success led to failure in digitalization. In Korea, a financial crisis promoted the digitalization. I call it failure led to success in digitalization. In order to explain that, she focused on a state policy choice. And actually, innovation took place at the company level. Some companies succeeded in innovation and became global companies, and others failed and dissolved. So in order to fully understand the dynamics and differences between Korea and Japan, one should focus on the role of private company, private business in shaping and making technical innovations and become a global digital tycoon like Samsung. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Shin, once again for very illuminating and critical observations and comments on 4 papers and presentations. I'm sure Dr. Park's comments will follow the same pattern. Please go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, this panel brings together 4 rich and diverse presentations that each tackling pressing themes in Korean politics. So it's beyond my scope to make a great comment on all 4 of the papers, but I'm going to do that anyway. So let me start with Dr. Lee's paper. Yeah, her paper addresses one of the most striking features of the 2022 presidential election, right? And this paper makes an important contribution because it challenges the assumption that younger generations are uniformly progressive. But my question is about some of the measurement and empirical modeling strategy. So here, the important variable modern sexism was measured through support for abolishing the Ministry of the Gender Equality and Family and support for abolishing gender quotas. It would be useful to know why the former variable, abolishing the ministry, turned out to be highly significant, while support for the abolishing gender quota turned out to be not that significant. It was somewhat interesting for me because one of the hypotheses Dr. Lee proposed was the combination of economic insecurity and some traditional values, the combination of them, and gender quota might be much more directly related to economic insecurity aspect. So it would be great to develop some more discussion about that. And there are also many factors affecting the support for Yoon by young males, considering the fact that, in fact, many people argue that young males tend to be they are much more closely moving toward extreme right. But it turned out that if we take a look at the data, so extreme rights in young males are a very tiny group, in fact. And considering the huge gender gap in the voting, it might be that there are so many variables affecting their decisions. So it would be great to show some substantive effect, from your analysis. And another last point for that is, Why do we observe such a huge change suddenly? So comparing the last election, there are big changes, right? So, and the emergence of economic insecurity and emergence of those importance of the traditional values, it may not emerge that suddenly. So there are something else affecting those sudden change. And one of the factors we may want to take a look at is the characteristics of the presidential election in Korea. It tends to be highly retrospective rather than prospective, meaning that it is evaluating the performance of the former president, and rather than paying attention to what the candidate will do after the person became the president. So there can be something about Democratic Party too. So that's my last suggestion. And Dr. Park traces 3 decades of Korea's tripartite dialogue among government, businesses, and labor. And his explanation about the characterization of the zigzag path, seems to be very interesting. And it seems to me that the zigzag path stems not only from the simultaneous transition, or democratization and neoliberalization, but also from the fact that social dialogue was driven largely by the president in a hierarchical manner, as the Professor Kim Young-mil's paper shows us. So considering the nature of the social dialogue where conflicting preferences are coordinated, so would it have been different if the dialogue had been hosted by some other actors like a legislature where conservative and progressive could participate together? So that's, so my point is, there are some point we need to take a look at in terms of the political process. And Professor Uttam's presentation offers a comparative analysis of Korean and Indian capitalism. And I find his argument is pretty compelling. Particularly emphasis on how distributive foundations matter for capitalist efficiency and dynamism. My question is whether the Korean model has itself changed since the 1997 crisis. So we are observing rising inequality, precarious labor, and financial liberalization. That suggests Korea may no longer be as socially embedded as it once was. So likewise, India's recent growth in digital industries complicates the picture. So I wonder if we are perhaps moving towards some convergence, or at least new hybrid forms, rather than a sharp dichotomy. And lastly, so Professor Kim discusses the politics of digitalization in Japan and Korea. And her emphasis on the importance of policy regime is persuasive, I think. At the same time, the same regime can yield different predictions. For example, Korea's presidential model has been effective in promoting digitalization, but it also carries risks. Centralized leadership does not always include desirable change. Moreover, Korea's frequent leadership turnover makes long-term structural change somewhat difficult, as Dr. Park's explanation of zigzag path implies. So if we look at responses to the aging labor market, for example, from Japan and Korea, Japan's gradual consensus-based approach appears to have been more successful compared to Korean experience, to aging labor market. So the difference may be explained by the characteristic of digital tradition, very different from some other changes, or there are some conditional factors we need to consider. So it would be great to have some discussion about these type of issues. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Hyun-Suk Park. Very, very relevant, and then stimulating observations and comments. I would like to thank both the discussants for their really important contribution today. Let me just spend about 7 minutes on my part, because I came all the way from Seattle to preside this 2-hour session Okay, so be generous to me, all right? But not only because of my long trip, but also the kind of substance that the presenters provided us with, to me, stimulate me in thinking about the following several points. Okay, first of all, what is political economy? I mean, for example, Dr. Lee Soo-hyun's paper, apparently no relevance to the conventional definition of political economy, frankly. But then why could we include that into our discussion in the session of political economy? So here, I thought about the following point. That is, so far, the political economy literature has paid very little attention to macro social structural conditions, things like that, frankly. Okay? So here, in our even discussions, two patterns. One is, Professor Lee's case, I think she's talking about social consequences of political economy, while Dr. Uttam's paper rather reverse way, social conditions for economic development. So I wonder whether this is a sort of a new beginning, the beginning of a new chapter in approaches in political economy in the years to come. That's my first thought. So if indeed Professor Lee could elaborate on the relevance of presentation to the general political economy, I think we can benefit from her answer, right? And then particularly Professor Uttam's paper to me is a very important one because I studied the Soviet Union, Germany, or Prussia, Japan and Korea or Taiwan, and even China. It's striking to say that whatever the reasons may be, whether it's by force like Soviet Union, or by consensus like in Japan, or by colonial rule in India or Korea, or cultural revolution, communist revolution in China. In every case of a successful late industrialization, you see the social conditions of equality, no matter what, wherever you look at it. So I hope Professor Uttam elaborate or develop further in a more wider historical perspective on the social conditions of successful industrialization. So what's also striking to add is that every successful late industrialization recorded almost 10% annual growth. It's so coincidental among different cases. So in other words, overall to me, particularly Dr. Park's, the tripartism, it's about society, social conditions. So in that regard, I want to make the following observations. Rather than primarily or mainly focusing on labor side, or tripartism among labor, management, and the state something, how about the relationship between general sense of a community at the societal level, and then the easy solutions of labor disputes? In other words, have we been too much closely focusing on labor only, rather than broadening our perspective? For example, in that regard, I think the South Korea lost two very great opportunities. The first one is early 70s under Park Chung-hee. In the name of the Semaul movement, to me, there's nothing Semaul about, to me, Semaul Undong. It's worse than all the movement, frankly, in terms of community movements, right? So I think why? That period was critical in that Korean economy was rising. So much easier to build a consensus at the societal level. So Korea lost the opportunity. Second opportunity is financial crisis. Everybody has been saying that President Kim Dae-jung, sort of rescued Korean economy and Korean society. But I don't think that's totally true. When I look at the statistics of Korea's trade with China, only starting 1999, the level of trade with China dramatically began to increase, which saved Korean economy. So accordingly, Kim Dae-jung's or IMF imposed various reforms actually ended up in the middle. Almost none of these reforms, other than debt race issue, had gone through has run its own course to the end result. So, in other words, this is the worst. This is sort of a bad condition, which might facilitate once again social consensus, but we never took advantage of this opportunity. So, throughout the last about 50, 60 years, South Korean society has lost two great opportunities to build up general social community sense, which might have made easier for labor disputes. So I thought, having heard the tripartism, I wonder whether it's high time for us to expand the horizon a little bit, to link the labor issue to the higher level of general social, societal level of consensus, the issue. Okay, and finally, Professor Kim's very interesting paper to me. I mean, she mentioned about basically differences in the decision-making structure between Japan and Korea, right? Here, I would say two things. One is if you look at the variety of capitalism literature, two things that sort of I can discern two distinct patterns. One is that they do not consider the production system as a whole. In other words, willingly or unwillingly, variety of capitalism is based upon mass production model, the factory system, basically. While digitalization is not about mass production like the Ford system or something like that. So to me, the Japanese model recorded this great success at the stage of mass production, the level. So they had to make the serious adjustment to the new stage of a production system. Second thing about variety of capitalism is very sort of a closed model without considering the fully international conditions. Okay, so going back to Professor Kim's the presentation, which I really appreciate much, but then she stopped short of elaborating what consensus model actually meant or means in understanding digitalization. I think, although I acknowledge she referred to the Aoki's the model, but then Aoki's model is not so much about, it's not only about consensus, it's about the concept of congruence. That I wish Professor Kim would elaborate more on this concept of congruence in understanding difference between Japan and Korea. Korean model is not simply only hierarchical. There is no congruence. They don't care about labor issue at all. But in Japan, there is a main bank, and then there's labor, and then there's the management, and then state. So they have to deal with the 4 sectors or 5 sectors in terms of congruence. But since the lack of congruence in Korean system, it's the top management is much freer in making adjustment to new conditions. Okay. Anyhow, my final point is that the apropos for the big title of Korea as a symptom. Now, each presenter and the commentators provide us with enough symptoms, but also new possibilities for our future, like a tripartism, or the Indian comparison, or Professor Kim's presentation, or modern section, whatever there is, enough symptoms are there, but then Professor Kim and Professor Uttam provide some hopes in terms of strength of a Korean model compared to the India or to Japan, something, right? But then I think it's high time for us to locate Korean model of political economy into the general literature of variety of capitalism. To an extent, South Korean model could contribute to the general understanding of varieties of capitalism literature. To me, it's a very, very important one. And then finally, all these papers nearly really sort of address what are the distinctiveness of Korean model. To me, it's high time for us to organize our distinctiveness. For example, when as I have been teaching abroad, the BTS model, everybody, I mean, even press con today, this morning talking about K-drama, whatever, K-culture, K-pop, something. But once Yoon Suk-yeol kind of thing happens, everything evaporates. Everything evaporates, right? So how to locate, how to situate Korea's the political economic model in the general literature of variety capitalism, to me, is incumbent upon us to accomplish this very deep, important topic at a timely point of our history. So, having said that, let me just give each the presenter to respond to the main points of what they have heard from the discussants. Okay, so and then if you keep your time rigidly, then you will do a favor to our audience. Okay, all right. So please, just do in reverse order, Professor Kim. Why don't you make a quick reaction or response?
If you understand my situation, can I speak Korean? Because I have some problem to improvise English. So maybe we don't have enough time, so I think it is better to speak Korean. So 귀한 커멘트에 대해 굉장히 감사드립니다. 지금 제가 글이 아직 메시해서 읽기가 굉장히 힘들었을 텐데 이걸 읽어서 이렇게 코멘트를 해주신 토론자 선생님들께 정말 감사드립니다. 일단 처음에 그 신광현 선생님께서 말씀해 주신 것처럼 기업 수준에서의 혁신이라고 하는 부분을 좀 더 애드업을 할 필요가 있다고 생각을 합니다. 실제로 그 연구에는 조금 그걸 다루고 있긴 한데 저는 기업 수준에서의 혁신조차도 기업을 둘러싼 여러 액터들하고의 관계 속에 놓여 있다고 생각하고 그랬을 때 그 일본에서의 기업과 정부 관계 또 기업 이외의 은행이라든지 다른 스테이크홀더스 이런 관계들 그런 게 굉장히 중요하다고 생각하기 때문에 그런 관점에서 봤을 때 단순히 팔러시 레짐이라고 하는 게 국가가 어떤 팔러시를 가진다라고 하는 걸 넘어서서 그 팔러시 모델 전체, 레짐 전체로 봐야 된다라는 관점에서 저는 접근했고 그런 컨센서스 모델이라고 하는 게 단순히 정부의 어떤 그 입장만을 보여주는 것이 아니라 그 기업하고의 그 관계 속에서 또한 기업이 어떤 정책, 그 기업 내에서의 중요한 결정을 내리는 데 있어서도 동일한 그 시스템이 작동하고 있다라고 보고 있고 그 부분을 실제로 근데 논문에서 좀 더 그 보여줘 드려야 되지 않을까 생각을 했습니다. 선생님의 코멘트를 듣고 감사합니다. 그리고 박현서 선생님의 코멘트는 그러니까 한국 역시 한국이 뭐 어쨌든 뭐 경제적인 측면에서 혹은 디지털라이제이션이나 이런 혁신적인 측면에서 상대적으로 빠르게 적응해 온 것은 맞지만 그러나 한국의 이 시스템 자체가 굉장히 불안정한 혹은 이런 부분을 가지고 있고 그게 앞으로 향후 우리의 과제들을 해결해 나가는 데 있어서 오히려 또 좋지 않게 작동할 수 있다라고 지적을 해주셨는데 저도 그렇게 완전히 그 totally agree 하고요. 그래서 제가 마지막 결론에서 덧붙인 것이 한국의 이런 그 빠른 그 hierarchical한 이런 시스템이 잘 작동하는 것은 대통령이라고 하는 시스템, 대통령제 자체가 굉장히 안정적일 때 그래서 여당의 서포트를 받고 그리고 또한 대통령 자체가 또 그 시민사회로부터의 그런 개혁에 좋은 그런 아이디어를 가지고 들어와서 실현할 수 있을 때 그게 정상적으로 작동하지만 그게 잦은 정권 교체나 아니면 여소야대나 이런 상황에서는 사실 거의 무력하게 아무것도 할 수 있었다라고 생각을 하고요. 그다음에 일본의 합의에 기반한 그런 모델도 과거에 실제로 그 성공했었던 걸 보여주지 않았습니까? 근데 제가 아까 발표에 제대로 잘 드러내지 못했던 것 같은데 그게 70년대까지만 하더라도 그게 실제로 좀 더 관료 중심으로 해서 그게 그 내셔널 이코노미 전체를 위한 퍼블릭 굿이 무엇인가라고 하는 방향으로 만들어가는 것이 좀 더 있었다면 80년대 이후에 족정치나 이런 것들이 발전하면서 굉장히 그 팩셔널한 인터레스트가 훨씬 더 강하게 작동하면서 전체를 위한 그 만들어가는 게 이제 약해졌다라고 하는 거를 얘기를 하고 싶었는데 일본이 그래서 지금 최근에 하고 있는 중요한 개혁 중에 하나는 그런 것들을 하기 위해서 좀 이렇게 그 코오디네이션 파워를 강화시키기 위해서 총리실의 파워나 이런 걸 강화시키고 있고 그렇게 하는 측면이 하나 있는데 거기에 더불어서 이전에 그런 70년대까지의 그런 합의를 통해서 만들어지는 그런 컨센서스 그러니까 그거가 더 잘 작동할 수 있도록 만들 수 있다면 일본이 한국보다 여전히 훨씬 더 나은 체제를 가지고 방향으로 갈 수 있다고 생각합니다. 네, 감사합니다.
벌써부터. One or two important ones.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for distinguished professors for the comments. I think one point is very important that Professor Ha has mentioned about the political economy approach. And actually, the social has been, especially for when we have concentrated on East Asia and the development of East Asia, so the state and the market has took the precedent and the society has been at the receiving end. However, as Karl Polanyi, he has mentioned that market society is needed for the market economy. So when I'm talking about India, so the structure of the caste system, that the people at the top, at the apex of the society, they have never operated in the framework of market. So that's why bringing the private enterprise in India has been a challenge, though as the other commenters, the comments that there can be a convergence now, that India and Korea both heading towards some kind of convergence. However, the social is very distinct in India. Yeah. And I think, as I remember one sentence that Professor Ha mentioned when I was a student here. And I was very surprised to listen that, but I can understand now fully. He told that India can never become Korea. India at best can become Brazil. And I think the crux is that the economic inequalities, they can be removed by taxation, by many things. But social inequality, which has a building of thousands of years, like caste system in India, it cannot be eradicated simply. And I think that's why India, though its economy is moving in the fast-forward lane now, but the society may apply a brake at some point of time if the society is not changing or the society is not becoming the market society. So thank you very much, sir. Yeah.
I'll try to. Yeah, thank you very much for the nice comments, my three discussants. Mostly, I also very agree with the points and questions, all what you just throw to me. Especially Professor Shin's notice on the mistrust of KCTU to the political system and the political power. That's also a very important thing, I think, and especially it's also related to the theoretical scope of neo-corporatism theory, which emphasizes on the relationship between union and party, and so on. But in Korea, as Professor Shin said, that the enterprise union system, it's very important structural ground, and this is also related to what Professor Ha's argument on the societal basis of consensus making as well. So I think with this kind of 30 years experiments, I think now is the time for Korean actors to create rather more pluralized or multi-layer system of a dialogue and more local level, and also not only just in the emphasizing on the administrative area, but as Dr. Park just suggested, in the parliament as well. So this kind of multiplication of social dialogue mechanism, it can also lead us to create more socially embedded conditions of social dialogue and consensus making. It means the more maturity of democracy in South Korea. I think for this, the political leadership, and also for this, they need also social consensus making. And I just suggest nowadays on Lee Jae-myung government to create this kind of environment. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'll try to be brief. First, I'll take Dr. Park's questions first. And thank you so much for asking this question, because that's the part I really wanted to elaborate, but I couldn't because I ran out of time. So about these two variables measuring modern sexism, of course, so I wondered the same thing after the results. So I did Pearson correlation analysis and then VIF. So bottom line is that there is some correlation because they are measuring similar thing, but not entirely same, right? It's not surprises about whether you want to abolish gender equality measures. But it's not a problem of collinearity. And if you put only one at a time into the model, i.e. whether abolish moge or abolish gender quotas, each one at a time, that they are both statistically significant, but of course, in terms of coefficient, MOGEF is much more salient. But when they are put together in the model, of course, the second one, gender quotas, that drops out in terms of statistical significance. The reason why my interpretation would be because it enjoyed much more salience, because it was one of the top 10 election pledges of the conservative government during presidential election. And then, yes, of course, I'm not saying that this is only one predictor of conservative turn of young men, or we can see conservative turn across all gender and age group, according to the first graph. Otherwise, Yoon Suk-yeol wouldn't have won, right? But my key takeaway is that young men did so much more so than any other groups, of course. And then there are other pathways. For instance, of course, what Democratic government, the incumbent party, did and didn't do very well during their time in power. Number one, probably housing policy, especially among young people, and there are other failures. So I agree with him. I'll try to take Professor Shin and Professor Ha's comments and questions at the same time. And I tried to, there are commonalities between South Korea and other OECD countries, yet there are also something unique to South Korea. Conscription, mentioned by Professor Shin, of course, it is unique to South Korea. Also, what is slightly unique to South Korea is that in terms of literature, modern sexism has been sort of brought up in case studies in mainly European countries where we really see, and according to some index, there are some advances of women, not just, of course, in many OECD countries, more women go to university than men, and also their achievement, great break into the labor market, and then these elite job occupations. But what is perhaps unique in South Korea is conscription, number one. Yes, I do take that, and which I elaborate in my first paper, but I will do so with great care in interpretation part in my second paper. But number two is that the political economy part is that the highly dualized labor market and the big difference in terms of wage and treatment between standard and non-standard workers. In South Korea, it's exceptional case. I mean, although labor market dualization, it is quite secular across OECD country, but the differential treatment and especially wage differential between regular and irregular workers is second to none in South Korea. And that really is reflected in shaping young people, especially young men's status anxiety about not getting good enough job, which can also springboard them into the life of happiness, what they desire into family and children. I'll stop here. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Please allow the Professor Kwon and organizer, please allow us 5 minutes, 10 minutes for the audience. I know it's not easy to make comments based upon listening to the presentations from my past experiences, but I think enough has been said about so many different issues. I'm sure some of you might have some urge to express your views. Yeah.
Is it on? Yeah.
Please introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, so hello, my name's Anna Yates-Liu. I'm from Seoul National University.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Thank you, first of all, to the presenters, discussants, and chair for some very interesting comments. I have to admit, political economy is not my usual area of expertise, so I was able to learn a lot. I'm coming more from sort of cultural studies perspective. I think, well, everything was very interesting. What particularly struck me was Professor Shin's discussion on this discourse of loss with regards to the perspectives of how young male voters are turning more and more conservative recently in Korea. And I think this discourse of loss is a very, very important factor. It's clearly a very strong discussion within Korea, which is affecting things as we've seen. In terms of this discourse of loss, I mean, you mentioned sort of the last few decades and how things have changed within those last few decades compared to the 5-6 decades before. I think, obviously, if we are looking from a historic perspective, that's in contrast to several centuries of disenfranchisement of women. If you want to talk, you could start from, say, the Goryeo dynasty, moving into the Neo-Confucian Joseon dynasty, where women used to be able to inherit property and were then gradually sidelined from society, however you want to phrase it. I think perhaps two factors that need to be included in this, which are maybe not necessarily political economy, but have very strong impacts here. On the one hand, the factor of education as to where do we look to formulate this discourse of loss, and the very, very strong factor, particularly in the most recent election and now in the discussions around impeachment and so on in the last year, of social media. And new media practices, YouTubers, as a very big factor in swaying this discourse. I think that would be a very interesting factor to bring into discussion, because I haven't heard it mentioned so far here. But yeah, just thank you very much for very interesting debates. Thank you.
I'd like to, address my question or suggestion to Dr. Woo-Tang. Your presentation, actually I didn't, attend it fully, but also your earlier writing on Korean Jaebul, etc. I think we can think about, these dualities in India and Korea. In Korea, dualities, institutional dualities in the corporate governance, Jaebul, as practical institution, but the more general liberal legal framework, which are not quite consistent with Jaebul. On the other hand, Korea is very strong anti-communist country at the political level, but socially speaking, the Americans left Korea after carrying out or forcing Koreans to carry out strong land reform, and also advising them to institute very broad, this general education, public education system, etc. And actually, the conditions after this was very similar to China after 30 years of socialism in the 80s and something like that. What I'm trying to say is that they, in order to survive with all these socialist pressures around, Americans had to compromise this liberal policy by making Korea a very quasi socialist, not socialist, but very broad, egalitarian society. And Park Geun-hye era was, in a sense, very much socialist in many aspects, actually, in order to survive these socialist pressures. What about India? I think India is very socialist at the top level, but it's not at the grassroots level. If you go to Kerala state, it's different, of course. But so its dualities differ there, but differ between Korea and India. But on the other hand, also, this is my question actually about this corporate governance. The earlier, state. The firms, state enterprises, maybe didn't really have any, serious institutional dualities, right? But on the other hand, I'm asking you, what about the latest, more properly, the capitalist, privately governed enterprises? Are they, totally different? From these earlier state enterprises, and are these also different from the Korean Japan? Yeah.
Thank you very much. Actually, maybe Professor Uttam, you can talk to him in person after this session is over. But my final thought about India is that India, there is everything in India. So you cannot characterize with one word or two concepts. Once again, Dr. Kwon, Professor Kwon, I hope we are satisfied with our discussion of this session by laying out so many different symptoms of Korea. So I think the session served well to the purpose of your general theme of Korea as symptoms. Okay. So in that regard, I would like to thank the presenters, the Professor Lee, Park, and Uttam, and Kim, and our distinguished discussants, Professor Shin and Dr. Park. And then I also thank our audience for your patience and attentiveness. And I really think that the session is successful. Thank you very much. Let me conclude this session. All right, bye.